and see us all okay?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Well, we really appreciate you making some time here. I know we'll probably have some people joining here in just a little bit, just with transitions of school calendars and schedules. And then I know we've got a couple other classrooms who can't attend live, but are going to be watching the recording tomorrow and Wednesday. So we really do appreciate your participation. And I know you've got a lot of stuff going on during this call, but just to kind of set the stage here, in this room that I'm in is 2 classrooms of 6th graders. Okay. And then the other screen I know is currently empty. They are transitioning from science, but there will be 2 other 6th grade classrooms that will be filling that room here quite soon. So just so you have a context of who's actually on the call here with us. So before we get into some of the questions we have around the idea of storytelling, I thought we would start with the most probably obvious question. Who are you? What do you do? And that sort of thing. So we have a lay of the land in terms of who we're talking with today.
Sure. So I am Danielle Kurtzleben. I am a politics reporter for NPR, which stands for National Public Radio. And you definitely have national public radio stations there in Iowa. So you should listen because it's great. But yeah, so I cover politics, and more specifically, what I end up covering a lot of is campaigns. So when all of the Republican presidential candidates start flooding to Iowa soon, which they will, I'm about to go on parental leave, but after that, I will be in Iowa quite a bit, following them around and talking to voters. I talk to candidates. I talk to Senate candidates, congressional candidates, and ask them what they believe in, what they care about. And I talk to voters and ask voters who they like, who they don't like, why they don't like them. So my job is a lot of talking to people and running around with a microphone and getting tape, slicing it together, and making radio stories.
I love that. And before we kind of dive into what you just talked about here, just to also kind of maybe set the stage, because some of these kids may not necessarily know what NPR is. Could you explain a little bit about NPR as well? I mean, I know we say it, and we realized last week, we're like, oh, NPR. And we're like, wait, they may not even truly know even what NPR is. So I want to get back to what you just said. But before we do that, what is NPR?
Yeah, so NPR stands for National Public Radio. And we are largely, but not entirely, a news organization. NPR, the way it's organized is this. I'm here in Washington, D.C. I go to the headquarters here to do my job when I'm not here at my house. And we do national news stories here, but you also, in any given state, have a local station or several local stations. So in Iowa, it's IPR, Iowa Public Radio. Minnesota has Minnesota Public Radio. So different states have their own stations that do more local news, and your local station will take their stories and then also some of ours, the ones that they want to put on the air, and put them together and make a news show, put up a news show in the morning and in the afternoon. So you could hear me in any given state, and we might take an Iowa story and play that on National Public Radio, depending on what the news is. Like if there were a massive earthquake in Iowa tomorrow, we'd probably get a story from one of your local reporters on it. And the public part of that, I should add, we get a little bit of taxpayer funding, but largely we are funded by donors. We have people who donate to their local stations because they like what we do. And so we don't have to rely as much on ads and that sort of thing. We just, we get money from the people that listen to us. It's really nice.
I love that. So I appreciate you sharing to kind of clarify some of that too. And so going back to what you were talking about, covering the stories, you say you talk to a lot of people, and then you talk about splicing the video and the audio and trying to put all that together. I was just sharing this, and I'll put this up here on the screen just so you have a little bit of context. I know I bombarded you with a bunch of hyperlinks that I didn't expect you to look at all, but this so you can kind of see some of our work. Let me change the screen here. Go. Yeah. So we're just talking with the kids before you jumped on. We're just kind of reminding them of what we've done so far in our journey. And this kind of graphic, and I'm just setting the stage here. So when you talk about what you're doing, hopefully they can start to build some connections. We've got several pieces of information we've gathered. And so we've got a document that he wrote us, about 5 pages of his words. We've had one video interview with him. We just did our second video interview with him on Friday. We have access to another interview he did with somebody else. We've got pictures. There is a book on Amazon that we've been kind of using to try to make sense of the middle ground for some of the pieces that we can't find, as well as the kids have been diving into research and gathering visuals and all that. So in some ways, it's kind of similar to what you were alluding to a little bit earlier, where you're talking to lots of people gathering the story. We've been trying to figure out all the information we can to tell a story. So I'm sharing that with you and for the kids to kind of visually wrap their head around. When you talk about covering a story and you talk about getting that ready for the radio, how do you go about doing that? You gather all these voices, all this audio, all this video, all these angles and opinions and facts and all this stuff, and then you've got to splice it in a way that's compelling. Can you kind of talk us through a little bit about your process or how you sift through that or try to make sense of it all so that, in your case, people on the radio listen?
Yeah. So there are a couple of, maybe I'll go with a couple of veins here. The first is figuring out what the story is. As an example, maybe I'll use I'm thinking about a couple of years ago, I covered the kickoff of the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. So ahead of 2020, I went to he had a big rally in Brooklyn, which is where he had grown up. So I went to Brooklyn and was there to cover the rally. Now, the thing is, of course, you're going to include some clips of what he says, but you can't just include a hodgepodge of like, he talked about this, this, and this, the end. I mean, it tells people what happened, but it doesn't really give them context information. It's not necessarily useful if you're not giving people context, saying, here's why it's important that Bernie Sanders talked about this, but not this. So that's when you first of all, it involves listening really hard to him, but also talking to a lot of people, like getting way more information than you need. And that is really helpful. Like I will gather an hour or two of tape, like besides his speech, just walking up to person after person after person and saying, what do you like about Bernie Sanders? What's interesting about him? Or don't you like him? Maybe you're here to protest. I don't know. Because all of that information, even if I'm gathering all of that to make a 4-minute radio story. So there's so much that is not going to be directly used, but it's still useful because if I can go into a story thinking, all right, I would bet Bernie Sanders is going to talk heavily about healthcare. And I can run around asking all the voters what they think about healthcare. If I get to about 3 or 4 interviews and I realize no one has brought it up, then then the story changes. Like the story kind of tells you what it is. So if it turns out to not be that, if suddenly he starts talking about education instead of healthcare or police brutality or any number of things, then that's the story. The story is kind of what it's made out to be. So maybe a better example that is more akin to the thing that you're working on, because you are focusing on one person, right? So a couple of years ago, I was doing a project on women who have run for president, and I talked to this woman who ran in the 1980s. Her name is Pat Schroeder, and there are a number of avenues I could have gone into. I don't want to bog you guys down in all of the details of this because I could go on for forever. But I went and interviewed her. She's in her 80s now. And she got into the race because she was working for a presidential candidate who there was evidence that he had cheated on his wife. And that was a big, big, big deal back then, right? And I thought I would ask her about that, about like, how did that feel? How, like, to have your boss disappoint you in that way and to drop out of the race. And once he dropped out, then she decided to get in. But instead, she didn't have a lot to say about that. She was like, yeah, it was disappointing. Now let me tell you this thing. And she started telling me about this instance where she was giving an interview and she cried a little on camera, just the teeniest bit. And the media, news reporters, everybody lost their minds and made a big deal out of it. And what I realized was, look, if she's excited about that, that's what the listener is going to be excited about. No one wants to listen to someone being bored. So if whatever she's excited about is going to be more exciting to listen to, and also probably more meaningful. So yeah, in terms of that is that's the first vein I was talking about in terms of finding what the story is about. In terms of putting it together, then one trick that I use, because you guys, it looks like you have this massive, or maybe more than one interview from this Michelle Mockers guy. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
You have so much information to use. And I realize you're not making an audio story necessarily, but one way of really in quick order whittling things down that another reporter told me once is like, at some point when you're done with all your interviews, sit down, take a piece of paper, divide it into 4 sections, and write down, okay, what do I remember that was the best sound that I got from this person or from this place, people, wherever I was reporting? What are the best scenes that I got? You know, if I'm at the state fair and there's a presidential candidate feeding pigs, like there could be good sound of that, you know? What are the best ideas? So perhaps it's the Mockers guy talking about his relationship with his brother. Is that something you want to highlight? And also, what are the best quotes? Like pretty much the stuff that sticks in your mind the most, that you think, wow, that really had an impact on me. You're human, your readers / listeners are human. That's probably the stuff that's going to impact them as well. And the stuff that you are most excited to tell, or to draw, to write, to put together is probably the stuff that is going to be most interesting for someone else to read, because like your interest in your story comes through. If you're bored to tears by it, someone else might be as well. So, I mean, one guide I often have is like, make the story you want to hear, because that's often the way to make it clearest, most understandable, to explain it best, all of that.
No, that's great. And that is really helpful. I think you probably can't see with their lights dim here a little bit, but kids are writing down some notes. And I think even that 4 quadrants, even as you were saying that, like I'm instantly thinking through some of the stories and ideas that he shared. I won't say them out loud. I don't want to skew the kid's story, but that really helped me kind of frame even my own thinking, like here in the moment. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that. You know, and maybe on the flip side, through your experience of crafting and narrating stories, I think whether we're doing it through words and pictures or you through radio and audio, I mean, a story, like you said, has to have that human element. Are there things that you've learned through your job of things that maybe we should not avoid, but things that, you know, like don't work? I know it's kind of like the same question of what I've kind of asked you, but, you know, I think as we're trying to process through, for a lot of us, this is our first kind of rodeo where we've got somebody we want to make sure we do right by, as well as tell that compelling story. And so as we start to merge into this work, you know, are there some things maybe to keep in our mind as like, don't go down that rabbit trail, or things not to do?
I mean, one general tip I have is to be specific, to not get too bogged down in the high level things. Like you may, forgive me, I don't know your subject story super well, but like you may need to say at some point in your story, here's what was happening at this point in World War II. Germany was invading Poland and blah, blah, blah. But instead of saying, World War II was an intensely frightening time to be in France because blah, blah, blah. Like you might say that, or you could, I mean, it's usually better to illustrate it, to say, here's an instance from Michelle's time in France that shows just how scary it was. Even if his experience is not universal, I mean, no one's is, but I mean, even if his experience is very particular to him, like he lives in a very different setting from other people, or he's much richer than your average French person, or much poorer, whatever. I mean, you can acknowledge that, you know, he's not typical, but either way, the being really specific always, especially at the top of your story, to like grab people and make kind of pull them into someone else's human experience. Specificity is always gonna be one of your best friends. Yeah. Like, especially in a project like this where you're focusing on one person, don't try to remember you're telling a story rather than explaining something. Explaining something is just going to turn, your story's going to turn into a lecture, you know? A story is much more interesting to listen to than a lecture.
Yeah, I like that. That's something that I think it'd be really important for us, is we've done the research of, we're doing the research of World War II and the French Resistance, but he does have a unique story in our case. And we learned a lot about what the resistant fighters and people were doing in terms of like secret messages and codes. And even our last interview, he didn't do any of that because he was more like in this farm, kind of in the woods type area, where versus like some of the more larger spaces or the cityscape, so to speak, where maybe they had to do some more of that. So it is very unique. Not that the research is wrong, but it's a different particular to the work that was happening during that time. So I think that's something that we need to definitely bring out to light in this story as you're talking. I don't know if you're able to hear that, but the only question is like, how detailed do you get about the person in terms of like who we're talking about, in terms of, we do have some creative constraints in terms of what we're able to put together, but we talked about specificity, if I can even say that word. But you also, how far do you go? Like, what's that balance for you in terms of you have all that stuff, or it doesn't become so granular that you kind of lose people in the scope of the story as well?
Yeah. It's hard to explain because some of it you do kind of by feel. But for example, if I wanted to convey, I didn't have the time for this actually in the story I did about this presidential candidate, but hypothetically, if I wanted to convey, this is a very warm person who is happily out of politics now. I could include the detail where when I walked into her house, she was like, "Oh, let me show you my Christmas tree. These are the ornaments my grandkids made for me." Like, just something that tells you, like, that conveys the feel of her. I mean, and the thing is, you want to use details that you've come by honestly, right? Like, if I did my interview with her and she was unpleasant the whole time and really mean and said a lot of swear words and like any number of things, not that swearing is necessarily bad, but I wouldn't use that detail because I would be misrepresenting her. I'd be kind of lying and saying, her name is Pat. Like, Pat is so nice. She's wonderful to hang out with. Well, that's not really the impression she gave me. To be clear, this woman was the sweetest person on the planet. But yeah, so if you're trying to convey that, I mean, use details that are in service of something. You know, not saying like he has brown hair, like, all right, great, but you know, he's a tough old guy. He still has tattoos on his forearms and he eats raw eggs for breakfast. I don't know, but like that, like something that at least tells you a thing about him, not just like he's kind of handsome or whatever you might have gathered from just looking at a picture of him.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on something real powerful, because I know in our first interview with him, very like cognizant of the fact we were trying to learn about him as a person.
Yeah.
And we did not want to get into his time in the resistance. That's what the second interview was for. So we wanted to kind of get to know who he was. So as you're sharing through that, we've got to figure out a way to layer that in, because he's an incredible man. He's 100 years old, still alive and kicking. He's probably more on his toes than most of us in this room. But he's a painter and a videographer, and he's got all these things to him. And so you can see him kind of come to light trying to talk about that, even though our task is to tell this story from this moment in time. But I think we got to layer in that human side, because that's really what we're after in the end piece of this project, is that, hence the title of the project, Complexity to Being Human. So you hit upon something that I think we've got to figure out how to layer those parts of him into the story, even though it may not fit the story we necessarily are being asked to tell.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a tough balance to strike, because also, I mean, first of all, you want to honestly convey who this is. And second of all, I mean, the thing that I told you about, write down the best scenes you have, the best ideas you have, the best quotes you have. You also have to be very flexible and open to the idea that I'm not sure how long your projects are going to be, but for me, I will be trying to make a 4-minute story, right? Or 8, or however many. I have a time constraint. Some of the stuff you absolutely love, you won't be able to use, or it might not fit. And it sucks, and it's painful, and you just wish you could include that quote, but you can't, and it drives you crazy. But sometimes it just doesn't fit into the story, and that's life, and that's the painful part of storytelling.
Yeah, and maybe it's a selfish curiosity, but as you do your work, what is your your turnaround time? What is your time frame where you have a story and you've got to pare it down to 4 minutes? Like what does it look like for a job such as yours?
It depends. So it depends on the story, on the type of story. If it's just news of the day, so if I'm, let's say, once again, a presidential announcement, if it happens tonight, then we want that story on the air in the morning. So, and often I'm doing this, not at an office or in the comfort of my home, but in a hotel room in God knows where. So the event will happen at, 6 p.m. and I'll run around and get all my tape and so on. And, in that instance, like I'm doing a story purely on it's not super analytical. It's just like, all right, Bernie Sanders announced, and the big theme was healthcare, and the voters are even more excited this time than last time. Then okay. Then I go back to my hotel room. While I'm interviewing people, I'm just keeping constant notes on, God, what were the best quotes? Because I need to get this done fast by the time I get back. And that night I will write it, edit it, and I'll have it turned around in 12 hours. But I mean, the flip side is if it's a story that's much more analytical, like this year on the campaign trail, a lot of voters have really been talking a lot about, I suppose, what was it in 2020, like voters have a lot of questions about Medicare for all. Then that is not so much a what happened story. That isn't like last night, blah, 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 blah. That's this year, here's a trend we're noticing. That sort of story can take a bit longer, because what you need in that kind of story is not just the quotes you've gathered from the dozens of events you've gone to, but also you get an expert on the phone to tell you how big of a deal is this, and you provide some analysis or some polling data or something that shows the audience, hey, here's why this matters. That can take a few days. There's the occasional story that I'm working on that takes weeks, or political reporting tends to go pretty quickly. The longest I've taken on a story is maybe a month or 2, but that's rare. Yeah.
I don't know if you're able to hear that, but the question was just a career question. What's one of your favorite stories that you've covered or been able to tell?
Oh man. One that I did there, this was a while ago, and this has nothing to do with politics, but a few years ago, I was in between jobs. I had a couple of weeks where I had quit one job and I was about to take another one, and I didn't have, and I just had free time. So I decided to do a story on my own that I would sell to whoever would take it. So I did a story on this, on competitive yoga. I went to the National Yoga Championships, and it's a weird scene. Like I'm not being judgy. I'm just saying, like, if you guys know anything about yoga, the whole idea is that you just do it at your own pace and you do the pose and you relax. It's all very zen. This was people competing at doing poses. It was wild and it was really fun, and it was fascinating to talk to to meet a new subculture of people that I did not know existed. It was a hoot. I had a great time. Someday when I get burned out on politics, maybe I can go be a fringe sports correspondent somewhere.
Well, I didn't even know that was a thing, so I know where my evening of phone swirling is going to be on tonight. Is competitive yoga competitions.
It's wild.
I won't be able to join. I can barely touch my toes, but I'll see what else. So I think, like, just one of the last things too, just be respectful of your time. And then I think for us, we've got to move into this piece of the story. You've hit on some really key things. I know that you're more audio and splicing that stuff there. We talked a little bit about just that process. Do you go through, do you storyboard? Is it just notes on a piece of paper? Do you have like some sort of template that you use? Or is it just that you've done it so long now, it's just kind of like an organic process? So I think part of us is, one, how do we sift the story? And then the other part of the skills that we're trying to teach, not just storytelling for this particular project, but like, what is some of that workflow that might work in other applications of life? So I didn't know, in your work, sometimes people just do it and they don't even know it's just what they do. But I didn't know if there's a rhyme and reason to the madness, so to speak.
Different reporters do it differently, of course. The way I do it is I kind of start with a skeleton. Like I'll make a Google Doc and I will go through the tape that I have. We have a program that transcribes it, and I will copy and paste out all of the bits that I liked, like all of the quotes that I think are the most interesting, the most helpful, the most fun to listen to. Like the sound of the pigs at the state fair, or the crowd screaming at the candidate, any number of things. And I will paste them into the Google Doc, and I use colors to help myself be able to visualize it. So all of the quotes I will highlight in yellow. And then I put some spaces in between them, and I think, okay, what order for these makes the most sense? And I will move them around, blah, blah, blah. And in between the quotes, because the way the stories that I work is, I'll start off by saying, today in Brooklyn, Bernie Sanders was in a really, really good mood. And then in yellow on my sheet, there will be Bernie Sanders saying, hello, Brooklyn, and everybody screams. And then my voice will come in again and say, this is his umpteenth run for the presidency. And so my stuff will be non-highlighted, his stuff will be. And that at least allows me to go through and say, okay, here's the rhythm of the story. I have this many quotes and I talk for this much time. Or like, I know at this point, if I see I have a massive amount of time of me talking without other sound, that can get boring. Or I'd better make it lively, because otherwise I might lose the audience or be over explaining something. So yeah, there's a lot. That's my main thing. And so I'll go through, and if I don't know how to connect this quote to this quote, I will literally put a jumble of letters in between them just to say, like, this, we have to work on that. We don't know what it's going to be yet. And then it's really a process of going over and over the skeleton again and saying, okay, the first 4 paragraphs work, the rest of this is a mess. And so trying to work through the rest. And that might mean reordering up here, then starting over again and saying, okay, the first 6 paragraphs work, then starting over again. That's how I do it. And I mean, it's not just me. I mean, once I finish a draft, I call up my editor and I say, okay, you listen to this. And I talk through it with her. I play her my tape. She times it so we know if it's long enough or short enough. And she tells me what she thinks, because she's going to hear entirely different things than I heard. So having other people look at your stuff is really important. And she'll catch things that I don't catch. Like, you realize you only have men in this story. You might want to talk to a woman. Or, you only have people who love Bernie Sanders in the story. Maybe you want someone who isn't quite a fan of him, because otherwise you can get very lost in your own thinking and just make the story that, yes, is interesting to you, but you want to make sure that it makes sense to someone else, and is fair to the people that you're talking about. Yeah.
No, that's great. I think that helps us as we're trying to frame out some of the stuff that we have. And we have transcripts, we have all that information. So now my gears are turning in terms of how can we make some sense of that stuff here as well. I do have a student here that does have a question for us. I'm gonna let her pop on up here real quick.
Yeah. So vocabulary wise, do you have any suggestions on how to set the the tone or the mood? If we were talking about an exciting point in his life, what words or phrases do you think would be a good idea to use in that sequence?
I feel like this is going to be an unsatisfying answer. It depends on the if you're saying an exciting period in his life, it depends on what's going on. Is it dark? Is it scary? Is it happy, exciting? What tell me more about what it might be.
Let's say they just got past a big breakthrough within their life or within the revolution. And they're super excited about it. They go and celebrate. Since we're not using our voice as an audible, with words, how do you think?
The first thing, definitely start with how he describes it. If you have him talking about it, so I suppose this is graphic and not audio, but if you have him talking about it, even if he isn't using, big thesaurus, impressive words, that doesn't matter. If he is excited and, talking animatedly and using exclamation points, start with him. And because if he's saying, my God, this was the most incredible thing that ever happened to me, then use that. If he's whatever he is most excited about, definitely use his words with that. And then you can fill it out and say, the things that he might not have been as articulate on. He was jumping up and down. Just make sure you're being, once again, it comes down to specificity. He was excited. Okay, what shows that he was excited? He was screaming. He passed out. I don't know. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Well, we appreciate your time. I know you've got to get on the radio here, I think, here in just a little bit. And so I think we want to take some time here to process. I really like the 4th section of the paper. And so I think we got some work to do. And this has given us, I think, just some added layers to help us be more organized and intentional in how we go about processing all the stuff we have to be able to tell this story the right way. And so I can't thank you enough. I know I speak for the teachers and the students and those that'll be watching the recording. You've given us a lot of just thoughtful prompts and questions to think about as we are now moving into this phase of being able to parse out the information to tell this story. So we really, really appreciate it. because I think it's really going to help guide us to tell a better story. In our case, the readers, and we've been able to benefit from that for you as you try to do that for your listeners.
Yeah, no problem. I'm really happy to help. I'm excited to hear what you guys come up with or see what you come up with.
Yeah. We'll definitely keep you in the loop and keep you up to speed with what we do once we get things moving and grooving. Once we get through today and obviously Valentine's Day and all that fun stuff, and then we'll move into the action.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I'm really happy I got to help out with this. So thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. Can we say thank you? Awesome. Thanks so much.
Bye, all.
Bye.